Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Side Projects. I, as always, am your host, Simon. In this one, we're looking at Brasilia, which is essentially a city, a capital city of Brazil, obviously, if you didn't know, that was built in essentially 3 years. So we're going to look at how that happened, and also what went wrong. Let's do it. For anyone not native to Brazil, it would be easy to mistake the country's capital for one of its better-known cities. Rio de Janeiro is the city the giant South American country is most famous for. Sao Paulo is its largest in terms of population. However, it is neither of these coastal cities, but rather the centrally located Brasilia, which has earned the title of its nation's capital. And the story of how Brasilia came to be is certainly an interesting one. The history of Portuguese settlers colonizing Brazil explains the coastal location of many of its largest cities. Discovered in the year 1500 by Pedro Álvares Cabral, the Portuguese used their newly conquered South American lands and its peoples to gain massive profit from trade, taking it back to Europe. This pattern focused the economy on the east, where developed port cities thrived to this very day. In the meantime, it came much more slowly to mainland Brazil, even as the port cities continued to follow European standards of advancement. In the centuries leading up to Brazil's independence, the Portuguese settlers continued this preference for remaining near the sea. While some, such as José Bonifácio de Andrade e Silva, proposed a mainland capital to prevent raids from the sea, this dream would not happen for another century. In the late 19th century, with the foundation of Brazil's republican government, new interest in development of the mainland swept the country's leaders. This was initially a profit-based motivation. Brazil's history until the mid-20th century can be largely condensed to a series of leaders most focused on the continued cultivation of cash crops like tobacco and coffee. That being said, there were other benefits of a more centrally located capital. It would be seen as more neutral rather than favoring the already prosperous coastal cities, and creating a new city untied to any province or area would prevent any province or area from having undue power or representation in Brazil's government. The idea of a centrally located city, designated as Brazil's capital, was actually core to the constitution on which the republic was founded, but this article, written in 1891, wouldn't have real-world effects until almost 60 years later. It was Brazil's elected president in 1956, Juscelino Kubitschek, who finally made the mainland's capital, Brasilia, a reality. A radical thinker, Kubitschek had plans for his term that he called 50 years in 5. He wanted Brazil to have the economic advancement of 50 years in just 5 years, not just on the coast, but everywhere in Brazil. Part of this plan included a neutrally located capital to house the government. Centralizing the bureaucracy would help Kubitschek and future generations of leaders deal with matters all across the large country with more swiftness and ease. In 1957, a contest was held for the role of principal planner of the new capital, Brasilia. Lucio Costa won this popular contest over 5,000 other applicants. Two others, Oscar Niemeyer and Roberto Burle Marx, would assist with the architecture of non-public buildings and landscape design respectively. Costa had a straightforward plan for Brazil's shiny new capital. In essence, the city would be composed of two parts. One, a municipal center for the grand administrative buildings that would house the newly relocated government leaders and bureaucrats. The other, urban sprawl for over 500,000 inhabitants, organized into square blocks for quick construction. The even squares of these districts, which would be home to the future housing, industrial and commercial centers of the city, would also make it easier to get around. It is, after all, easier to navigate new streets if everything is arrayed in a neat and orderly fashion. Costa's plans envisioned an efficient and organized city. This organizational structure also meant that construction could be planned and put underway with great speed. The construction had complete funding under Kubitschek's leadership and 50 and 5 plan, and construction began in late 1956. But despite Costa's streamlining, the construction was by no means a simple or easy process. The human power necessary to build a major metropolitan area in just under 4 years is certainly no mean feat. The construction took an enormous amount of manpower to complete, not to mention physical supplies and materials. Kubitschek and the engineers and architects he employed hired Brazilian workers from the poorer areas of the country, particularly the north and northeast. But the project's planners did not accommodate the needs of this giant influx of people, and makeshift villages began to spring up around the city where these traveling candango workers lived. These unforeseen complications did not stall Kubitschek and Costa's plans. The city grew out of the lands at lightning speed, with wide streets, urban centers, apartment complexes, and government buildings sprouting from nothing seemingly in days. Neymar's architectural style graced the city with a sense of elegance and beauty. In early 1960, Kubitschek declared the city of Brasilia open, a testament to the strength and ingenuity of the Brazilian people. Rallying behind Kubitschek's call for national unity, the new capital was a source of pride for Brazilians during and at the end of construction. Just 3.5 years, 41 months, to build a vast and truly sprawling urban center. It was easy to dream of the booms in the economy that Brazil would soon surely be the recipient of, especially in light of Kubitschek's other infrastructural work. The president had directed funds and construction manpower to focus on a system of roads throughout the country's mainland. Not only would these roads make travel throughout the giant country more accessible, goods and services would be able to move more freely, making them more available to a greater percentage of the growing population. Kubitschek had also supported various pieces of legislation that would allow car manufacturers to build factories in Brazil, adding jobs and making cars more affordable. During this time, Kubitschek's popularity soared, and the construction of Brasilia could only be hailed as an overwhelming success. But such a sudden upheaval of the nation's center of government and lavish spending of the government's funds could not come without downsides. After Brasilia's construction, the migrant workers that had done the hands-on work had little motivation to return home. Rather the opposite. They found themselves, many with their families, located right next to a city predicted to be, if you believe Kubitschek and his plan, a booming area of prosperity and growth. Rumor had it that new and better lives could be forged in the nation's shiny new capital. But unable to afford anything else, the Candango's temporary, cheap living arrangements, they became permanent. A visible distinction could be seen between the new, rich city and the poor working class with proximity to it, but without any access to it. As time passed, the millions of migrant workers packed into hastily constructed low-quality homes had the unfortunate effect of highlighting the country's social and economic problems. Kubitschek had intended Brasilia to be a symbol of a new era of national pride and unity, but in retrospect, it only made the economic gap between classes more apparent. Furthermore, Kubitschek had borrowed heavily from international banks, and this was a debt that would haunt the country for generations to come. Today, Oscar Neymar's architecture has had Brasilia named a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1987. Even acknowledging the social and political problems present in its history, Brasilia's refined buildings, alongside its wide, manageable planning, make it a visually appealing city. Unlike the United States' Washington, D.C., Brasilia provides a neutral city to house the country's government while also giving its inhabitants their own proportional representation in its Congress. A fitting efficiency, given that Brasilia is still primarily a city of government and bureaucracy and little else. Unfortunately for its 2.5 million inhabitants, the straightforward planning of Licio Costa, with work, housing, government and commercial centers all in different districts, makes for a rather uninteresting city to live in. Despite its large population, there's little nightlife. The centers for dance, food and the arts in Brazil continue to be the older coastal cities of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and the satellite cities born of overpopulation, out of and on top of the migrant workers' temporary homes, overcrowded with poorer residents. These satellite cities often resemble shantytowns that left-wing sympathetic Neymar never quite got to see his socio-economic dreams bear fruit in the city of his creation. Brasilia, the city, risen from nothing in 3 years. It has a complicated history in its rapid birth and development. For many Brazilians, it is remembered as a symbol of what the country's people can achieve, a monument to strength, urban development, and modernity. For others, Brasilia stands as but an empty shell, housing the government, but living as a physical manifestation of the problems that the same government has failed to fix. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, you know what to do. Smash that like button below. If you have a suggestion for side projects, please do leave it below in the comments. And thank you for watching.